Okay, please take your seat. We are getting started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IETF 117 IVY working group meeting. My name is Chu Fang, and we have my co-chair, Daniela. So this is our first working group meeting. I would like to thanks to anyone who has put your effort to make this happen. Okay, please note that this session is being recorded. Okay, next slide. Yeah, for Note Well, I think anyone should be familiar with that. But if not, please take a look at the slide and a couple of documents given here. Okay, next slide. For the IETF conduct guidelines, I would like to remind everyone to be respectful to each other. When you contribute, make sure that your comments is impersonal and technical. Okay, next slide. The IETF used the Meet Echo to join the meeting for both in-person and remote participants. And please keep your audio and video off if you are not speaking. And make sure to use the Meet Echo queue control to join the discussion. And especially for remote participants, use a headset is really recommended. Next slide. Okay, here is the Meet Echo link to our today's meeting, as well as Meet Echo and other information. You can take a look at it if you want. Next slide. And for minute takers, anyone helping take the minutes would be much appreciated. For blue sheets, it will if you are not joining the if you are not joining our Meet Echo meeting, but if you are on site, please scan the QR code just passed to you, and you do not need to do anything further. You have authenticated with the IETF data tracker to join the session. And also remind that for the RPR process, we will ask for polling of every draft author and contributor, and this prior to move to the next step in working group process. Next slide. And here is our session information. We will have a 2-hour meeting as well as the meeting material. Next slide. Here is our agenda today. I think Daniela will take over to give a brief introduction of the working group scope and the charter, and then followed by Bo Wu to present an inventory management model for enterprise network, followed by Italo to present a Young data model for network hardware inventory, followed by Diego to present the asset lifecycle management and operations problem statement. And I think Jing Wu will let's present the thoughts on network inventory overview. And then finally, we will have 30 minutes for open discussion. Any agenda version of this? Okay. Okay, then I will let my co-chair to present the following.
Okay. So I prepared some slides. Rob, do you want to join me to start to kick everything off?
Yeah.
Don't steal my slides, please.
I won't steal the slides. I haven't seen them, so it's fine. So you can say this. So I just want to effectively say, well done, forming working group. That's great. I think we did it for me in record time, so that was really nice to get that going. I'd also like to welcome Xiaofang. This is the first time she's been chair, so I'm sure you'll be nice because we're an ops group, and generally our working groups are nice. Other ones sometimes they get more fractious, so that'd be great. In terms of Ivy, I think that we'll have a chance review and discussion here. The key point I want to emphasize is, although the charter sort of covers looking at inventory Yang more generally, it's quite focused initially, and we're trying to get this sort of common part of inventory Yang sorted. So I'd like the sort of short-term focus on being to get those initial milestones sorted, and then after that we'll look at how to extend the working group and what it should cover. So welcome everyone. Hope you haven't taken too much of your slides.
I don't give a presentation since a while, so I'll stand up here. So let's start with the simple things. Welcome everybody. Some info on the working group. So, I mean, thanks Rob for the intro. We just put together a few lines to remember everyone why this working group was created, what's the scope, what is not. So why the working group was created? The main reason was that there was the need for that. There was a proliferation of very good documents and material in different working groups and in different areas. So there was the need to do a little bit of coordination, find what is, as our charter says, a common umbrella to facilitate the distribution of the work, clarify the scope, who does what, etc., etc. What is the objective of the working group? As Rob said, is a core network inventory model. So at the beginning of the working group, typically there is a lot of energy. Everyone wants to have adopted in the working group what believes is needed, etc. That is perfect. That is amazing. But let's start from something simple, basic, that then could be augmented in many different ways to add a lot of nice and fancy capabilities. What else? Again, here we copied, we quoted our charter. Derive common building blocks for inventory model that can be augmented, imported, or reused by other IETF models. So we will discuss this a little bit in the next few minutes. The idea is to build this core base model that everyone can use and augment, possibly together with an how-to. So provide guidelines on how to use it, first of all. We have seen that there is plenty of nice, fancy models, but sometimes hard to understand and hard to use. So that's why probably spending a little bit of effort on explain how to augment, how to use this model would be beneficial, mostly for the newcomers. Can you click the next, please? Thanks. Speaking about the scope, network inventory, devices from layer 0 to layer 3. When we wrote the charter, we thought that this was clear, but we received a lot of questions of what does it mean. Basically, from any device, from the optical layer to routers going through switches, whatever is between layer 0 and layer 3. Well, other things in scope: hardware inventory, software inventory. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, as of now, we have a lot of material covering hardware inventory, but a little bit less on software. So possibly it would be great to cover both topics. Mapping. So we have in the IETF produced a lot of models so far. Topology. This is a lot of topology models. Building or explaining how the inventory maps against all these existing models would be extremely beneficial for the consumers of this model. What is not in the scope? How this model is used. So this is something that, at least for the moment, we decided to keep outside the scope of our work. However, charters can be updated. I've been working in CCamp for 15 years, and we have a charter update every second year. So that's something. If you believe that your idea fits into the working group, should be there, we can discuss rechartering at any time. Possibly not in the next 2 weeks. Wait a little bit before we complete, at least at the beginning of our work, but feel free to suggest any change, to say, hey, I think you should cover my idea because it's a nice one. Next, please. Working group items. So these are the 6 bullets that you can find in the chart. The ones that we would like to cover. The IETF is contribution driven, so no one will force you to work on those. But if possible, this is what we should cover to consider our work successful. Terminology and scope, possibly aligned with other SDOs. Good luck with that. Basically, we started speaking about inventory a while ago, and many times I heard the discussions saying, that's part of inventory. No, it's not. Okay, then that other part is part of inventory. No, it's not. This other is. So we definitely need some terminology and a clear scoping of what is inventory and what is not. As I said before, hardware and software components should be covered in our model. Physical locations. This is another thing that we felt the need to call out explicitly because it wasn't covered in the material that is already there in the various drafts. Multi-layer and multi-domain. This is something that fits very well with our digital map work. So we would like to understand how the different pieces fit together, also from an inventory point of view. Mapping and correlation semantics. This is another topic that we anticipated before, which is how does the inventory relate with topologies, with whatever comes to your mind. Security and privacy, we are definitely not the right people to define any security extensions, new protocols, etc. However, if we find new threats, new requirements, anything, we need to raise them up, and that will be brought to the relevant working groups. Milestones, we just have one so far, which is the core Young model. As I said before, this is not necessarily the only document that we will produce. There could be many others. Please, Alex.
Yeah, Alex Clem. Quick question. So on the working group items, would this also include virtualized components or just anything where you would put an asset tag on, basically?
What do you mean with a virtualized component? A virtual router or
yes, for example.
A virtual router? Definitely, yes. It's a device.
Okay.
If you're thinking of a virtual network function, no, it's not covered in the scope as of now.
Okay, there's going to be lots of gray areas. So, all right, thanks.
Ahmed Al-Hassani, Swisscom. So as part of the scope, I noticed that you excluded how the inventory being used as outside scope. Can you elaborate more? Because the worry here for me is, I mean, these things are good if you can build stuff on top of it, but my concern here that if you exclude the scope early on, you might end up with something that is theoretical and we're just producing documents that have no implementation feasibility, and then we have 10 other working groups to address these things.
Okay, so basically, would you like to have someone telling you how to use the inventory information that you retrieve?
It's not about how to use it, but I think the APIs, the mechanisms, we have to take considerations of that as well.
That's of course included. That's okay. Maybe we needed to clarify what does it mean. Not
exactly. I mean, there is operational concerns, of course, that comes later, but the usability of these models must
that's
be
absolutely part of it. That's included.
Yeah.
That's included. But I mean, thanks for the question. It means that it needs to be clarified. Okay. What else? We probably reached the end of the intro. I wanted to say one more thing, but we will discover during the session because I forgot about it. Okay, we can move to the first presentation. Who was the first presentation? The preferred presenter? Bo, right?
Yeah, right.
Which is remote, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, remote.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay, Bo, it seems you are muted
Oh, I'm still
or
mute.
not.
Oh, you can hear. I think I'm
Speaking?
already
Yeah.
uploaded.
Very, very low.
Yeah, can you be close to the mic? And it's very low, your voice.
I have already like still not clear enough. Hello?
It's getting better.
Okay. Then I will get started. Thank you. So, hello everyone. Hello everyone. This is Bo, and I'm here to present this network inventory management model on behalf of all the authors. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this IETF network inventory model is based on RFC 8345 IETF network model. So some of you may think this is quite complicated, just as Daniela mentioned this. We have a plenty of topology model right now. So let me give some background of this design. IETF network model has defined abstract node list, link list, termination point list, and also network layers. The figure on the left shows some common network model being published based on IETF network model. From top to down, you can see SAP, Service Attachment Points Network, Layer 3 unicast topology, Layer 2 topology, traffic engineering topology. With all these logical topology networks, however, we found that the bottom physical network layer is missing. So we think this network inventory model can fill this gap. Therefore, on the high-level tree on the right, you can see that we create a new network type of inventory, and some inventory items of nodes and termination points are added to IETF network topology model. Regarding the license, the blue license list is what we added in this IETF meeting to reflect what IVY Charter defines. So next slide, please. So by this design, so let us examine whether this model can meet the need of the IVY. In the picture above is a simplified model for easy comparison, which consists of nodes, termination points, and links. Here, nodes represent devices, which could include several lists of inventory items, such as components, hardware, software, licenses, and geolocations. And termination points can represent interfaces. So in the table on the bottom, all the item on the left come from the scope of IVY Charter. Daniela just mentioned this. For hardware, software components, including licenses, we augment IETF node list to support these items. For mapping and correlation, so the design of RFC 8345 support this by nature. And regarding physical locations, we define geolocations, set reference, and we can add rec reference in the future version as well. So from our perspective, this model can meet the need of IVY core inventory model. Also having the mapping and correlation of multiple network layers, these models can be used to curate available network resources during service provisioning and also verify network configuration and forwarding status during service assurance. So next slide, please. So here is an example of the usage of this inventory model. The picture on the left are from RFC 8345. It's quite small. If maybe you're not easy to recognize. And also the right part from SAP RFC. The figure on the left gives an hierarchical topology example. Here, SAP network is mapping to a service layer overlay. And the network inventory model is mapping to the physical network. The figure on the right is part of SAP Young tree. There is a parent termination point is referring to a physical interface. We think current IETF network model cannot support this right now. And we think inventory model can support this node. So with this physical interface information and also the logical interface information from the other logical networks, we think the upper layer management system can curate whether there's available interface resources for new service, such as layer 2 VPN, layer 3 VPN, or even slice services. So next slide, please. So the purpose of this slide is about explaining the definition of termination points. In other words, for this model, interfaces. So some comments we received argue that components of devices can provide sufficient physical interface or port information. Currently, the components in our model follow the definition of IETF hardware and platform definition of OpenConfig. So on the figure above, the components can be chassis, slot, card, and port, etc. But from the tree structure of the components, you can find the components are mostly about hardware module information, such as hardware revision, software revision, model name, iSite ID, all this information. So for the use case of service attachment in previous slide, I think some specific interface attributes are missing. Some basic attributes I can think of is the interface type and speed. I think this kind of information now is not available in T topology, layer 2, layer 3 topology. So next slide, please. here, this question, what is within the core network inventory model? We think device, other words, node, termination point, which is interface attributes, and operational status are core components of network inventory. So that is our proposal of this. So from the above discussion, we think with these attributes, the model can, together with other logical network topologies, can help the management system to query sufficient resources to deploy new services or troubleshooting some forwarding or configuration state of the network. So next slide, please. Okay. I think this is the end of my presentation. And I'd like to hear what's their comments.
Thanks a lot. So the queue is populating. We have Diego to start with.
Okay, just is a concern about some of the terms because there are some of the terms that have been proposed are somehow more connected to topology than to an inventory. And we should be careful about this to avoid, I mean, if we're talking about node, a node can be anything, not a device. And it's better that we talk about a device. Or if we talk about termination point, it's better that we talk about a physical interface because it's what it is. Let's try to be clear about this and avoid precisely, this is one of the main goals that we started all this, is to avoid this kind of terminology clashes. That's all. I mean, we need a revision of this terminology.
We are back to the first bullet of the items. Thomas, please.
Thomas Graf from Swisscom. First of all, I think this is wonderful work, and I have just one comment on the speed on the interface. In my opinion, there are so we should find a terminology which is more general and then also applicable to other components. And I'm thinking from two values. One is basically what's the physical capacity and what is the planned capacity so an operator would like to use on that interface, for example.
Thank you.
Italo?
Yes, I have a comment on the termination point. Have you thought about putting these attributes as port in the port component? Because in the draft that I'm going to present later on, we discussed, and different components may have component-specific attributes. And I think many of the attributes I've seen, it can be port component-specific attributes. So I don't understand why we need to navigate from the component to the TP to get attributes which are component-specific.
Okay, I think my response to this one is that if there is some link, it depends on whether core network inventory will provide link information. In that case, the termination point is a very good candidate for the interface attributes there. Thank you.
Hi, Board. Thanks a lot for your presentation. It's Olga Havel from Huawei. I have a few comments or questions maybe for you. Like, one thing is I really believe a physical layer is great to have in the layered hierarchy for the digital map, and it's lacking. I'm suggesting maybe that you follow the layer 2 and layer 3 patterns in terms of how you augment the attributes, so that you say augmentation of the node, but then you have physical attributes so that it's obvious that those attributes are physical attributes, same as for the TP physical port or something like that. The second thing is you removed the link. Is it like, I remember in the last version you had the link as well, or is my recollection correct? How do you see modeling than the physical link? Is it through different technologies that we have or through other drafts?
I think the physical link one has two issue here right now when we are modeling this, because the first thing is the RFC 8345. This currently supports only unidirection link. That is one part of difficulty. The other part is that from like implementation perspective, like these links, they are passive inventory, you know, that the controller cannot be like easily to get this information. Sometimes it's manually configured from the system. So that's the reason I think this is important, but I see that it may in some cases this is optional one.
Yeah, my personal view is I think you are absolutely right in terms of unidirectional. So when we add bidirectional, hopefully, I think potentially you could use them, and I agree that they may be user-defined links, but we may need to have some kind of information about what the intent of the topology, of the physical topology is versus, you know, just collection from the operational status. And the last comment is about networks. Like, do you see it as a single network? So there is no need to single instance of the network. So there is no need to do any partitioning or domains there. And if you are planning to have multiple instances of the network, then my assumption is that you would also encounter the problem with RFC 8345 that you can't have a link between multiple network instances.
Yeah. So you are suggesting this network inventory should be support multiple? Maybe I'm not sure I getting your comments.
Yeah, there are two cases, administrative domain. So potentially if you want to have different instances per domain, like access core, but you know, this was more the question for you. Is it one network instance that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think we can talk this offline. Thanks.
Oscar?
Hi, Oscar González, Telefónica. So I guess the very first fundamental step that we need to do in the working group is to define which is the foundation of the inventory. If the topology is the foundation of the inventory, or we prefer to have a separate structure and then link it to topologies. I started like we implemented in Telefónica our inventory, and we started doing a first version, and we used the IETF network at the very beginning, and okay, it worked, and then it confused a lot people in Telefónica, and they forced us to say, no, please put it in a separate thing and link them. So we had to unbird the path. So my question is, what items from the IETF network was useful for the inventory? And can we take those items that are useful out to a new structure or not? And also, how much of the items that you have in the topology are not useful at all, and you will carry them, and it's crap that you have around?
This is a very good feedback. I mean, if someone already used the models and tried to build the inventory, I mean, the experience from the field is the best feedback that we might ask for. Rob?
Okay.
Rob Wilton, Cisco, as a participant. I just want to make one minor comment. Is somebody I think recommended using something like physical interfaces as a name or to identify things. It's just worth pointing out that if we discussed earlier that virtual devices are in scope, then those virtual devices won't have physical interfaces. So we need to choose terms that are generic enough but still specific enough to be understood. And I do appreciate that naming stuff is where everything slows down.
Ahmed Al-Hassani, Swisscom. I have one question about the definition that you have in the draft. And here you're defining the inventory as a list of equipment connected to a network. That means anything that is not already connected is not part of the inventory. Like if I have a backup device in my warehouse, that's not inventory if I follow this definition, which I find it a bit confusing. I think it should be including that as well. And it goes back to Oscar's comments as well. Like in the previous projects, what we did is inventory is the things, just listing the things that we have at the moment. How they are connected, that's part of the topology, that's part of your configuration. That's not part of the inventory. Thanks.
Yeah, this is also a good question. Yeah.
I wanted to tell Bo that if she wanted to reply, but she did. Okay. Please, Alex.
Okay.
Alex from FutureWay. Yes, I like this work. I think this is definitely important. But I have one question. There's also back in SNMP MIB land, there used to be the entity MIB in RFC 4133, which also described physical, logical entities, which seems to be related to this. So I think just as a suggestion might be to also look into what could be reused from the entity MIB.
Yeah, we already reuse most of parts of those entities already in IETF hardware.
James.
So James Cumming, Nokia. Had one question. I saw we had licenses in this model as well. And I know in the scope for the working group in general, there was mention of a software inventory too. It seems like it might be sensible to pull that out into a software inventory that could potentially then be augmented into this as needed at various points of the tree, rather than embedding it specifically currently in the overall node, where it may not apply depending on the buildup of the node.
Yeah.
So a comment on this. So during the week, I had the opportunity to talk to people in the corridors, etc. And the most common feedback was, guys, this is useful if it's done quickly. So this means that probably the process that you are proposing is the right one, to start with something simple, basic, and then build on top of that. This is something that we should keep in mind. Another thing that I wanted to clarify before we move on. Here we are not speaking about adopting any of the drafts that are being presented today. This first part of the session is information sharing. So presenting all the work that has been done so far. The idea, well, if in the end we identify that one of the drafts is fitting 90% of our needs, probably we can use that as a starting point. But the idea would be to start from scratch with a new draft, a new clean module. Rob, if you have anything against that, please shout.
Nothing against it. No, that makes perfect sense. The other thing I was just thinking in my head is maybe after this session, trying to organise an interim or something might be a good idea to keep the energy going rather than waiting 4 months.
And good luck to find a slot in the day that works for everyone.
So I have
that's true, and that's tricky. You do have the choice of doing like a couple of interims together against the coordination. It doesn't work as well. It is hard.
We will find a way. Marisol.
Yeah, hello, Marisol, Francisco here. I just want to highlight the similarities on some of the attributes.
Marisol, can you please speak a little bit louder? It's harder to understand you.
Okay. I don't know in which audio I'm talking. Is better now?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to highlight, and it's related to what Diego was mentioning as well. There is a lot of similarities on the work that we have been doing on DMLMO, and Diego is going to address this later. But it will be good to validate some of the concepts we have been presenting there and see, because there are similarities on this work, on the licenses part, on how components are addressed here. We consider assets. I think it will be good to have a further discussion on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're ready to move to the next presentation. Italo. And speaking about interface speed, you will sense the difference between Bo and Italo.
I will try to go slower. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm presenting on behalf of co-authors and contributors YAM model for network hardware inventory, which is a draft currently under development in the CCAM working group. Next slide, please. Okay, a bit of history. We presented the first version of this draft in the IETF112. The initial idea that we presented was a network inventory for which was hardware, but we call it network inventory. We discovered later on that we better qualify this as hardware. And the initial idea was, okay, well, let's look what we need for optical networks. But when we look at the model, we say, okay, this is very generic, can be considered technology agnostic. We presented it at the Opsera working group and CCAM working group, and we requested a slot to NETMO working group, but there was no time. But the idea was to see what is the right working group, and now we have the right working group for discussion. And then we updated the version in the IETF 113. The key enhancement there was to make the model really technology agnostic. So the name of the model and the scope of the model was to cover all the technologies, but keep the focus on the hardware inventory. And it was presented in CCAM, and the agreement was let's progress the work in CCAM, keeping Opsera and NetMod working group informed. And we got the document adopted in January 2023 as a document, as a CCAM working group, and we continue to progress the document based on the comments and the feedbacks through normal working group process. And we were keeping the former inventory mailing list, IVI, Opsera, and NetMod working group informed about the progress that we did. Next slide, please.
Yes, let me chime in here. Shame on the CCAM chairs, because so we knew that it wasn't the right place to move this work forward, but there was a lot of energy, a lot of momentum. We preferred to have the work done and then decide where this would fit instead of stopping. So shame on us, not on
it was well known that he could have moved, so we were aware of it. And also the authors were all aware of it. So what we did in the last periods after IETF17, we had a lot of discussion with some examples, and in particular, we provided the description of the components location. The components location has been defined as a free-form string in alignment with OpenConfig, so people can write it in the way they like, but we noticed that there is a well-known, a very common structure of that pattern. There is a pattern string which is well widely used, at least in the optical network. This is described on FTR547. So we added the description saying this is a very common used pattern. Maybe people can use it. Maybe most operators will require the same for consistency across different models. And there is some alignment in the terminology because, for example, in our model, the component is called chassis, which has a much broader applicability than the shelf. But in the TR547, the term is shelf, so we keep the acronym SH to align the string pattern, but we clarify in the draft that the SH corresponds to a chassis. Next slide. And this slide is summarizing what were the major requirements that drove our work. The major requirement was to export the inventory of the hardware from the domain, from the network controller, so all the devices within the network, to a resource management OSS. So it's really a read-only attribute where we say this is what is the hardware devices and the hardware components that are installed in your network. Next slide. Okay, we got some feedbacks from operators working on this draft. They have quite urgent needs, and already Daniele reported, because this is an issue that was discovered. This was a gap in the IETF model we discovered during a CTM POI applicability statement, and the objective is only what the operator needs today is something for hardware inventory. And we think that the work we have done has some good level of stability, so we would like to propose to keep this as a starting point for the IVI working group to have but to address the urgent needs while keeping open the additional stuff to be added. Next slide. Okay, so what is the approach? The approach is basically to start from the current model, work on generalizing some of the components we can see later on in the details, and try to go into an approach that can be done in a step-by-step. So we can focus now on developing a base model that covers the hardware inventory and for carrier networks, but making sure that additional extensions can be done through better compatible changes to support software, license, and enterprise networks. So we want to make sure that whatever we do now is not going to block the future evolution, but we don't want to delay the work that is required, that as urgent needs to until all the future evolution are cleared up. And this extension can be done either through new revision or through augmentation. This is young model options we can discuss in details. What is important that we cover now, we care now that this extension can be done in a backward compatible change as much as we can do, just to avoid major issues in the future. Next slide. So what are in particular the changes that we propose? We propose to change the name of the root from IETF network, hardware network inventory to IETF network inventory. So the new root will have a broader scope than just hardware inventory. So you can add the software component under the same root. We have some also discussion in our concept that the key rooms is very useful concept for hardware inventory in the carrier network, but if you start to generalize the situation, you may end up, we have noticed that there are other type of sites. So we will plan to generalize the list of equipment room to become a list of sites. And the sites will have a type, and the key room may be the first type of site that we address in this draft, but new type of sites can be added later on because we can define an identity and we can create a new identity in the future, a new site-specific attribute. And one idea was also that some sites can also be recursive. So a site can be a building or can be a campus or a room. And you can have the campus contain buildings, the buildings contain rooms. So if we make this more generic, then we make it more future extensible. And the idea is to keep, at this moment in time, out of the scope from the base model that items that require further discussion, like software components, licensing, virtual network elements, or other type of sites which are not worked out in details, like the Kimmer room. But make sure that what we do today is open to add this new stuff in a BC way, such that it's not a roadblock to the future evolution, which we can progress in parallel with our draft. The only issue that we think has to be addressed now, because it's basically difficult to resolve in the future, is whether the list of hardware and software components have to be two separated lists or only one list. That makes this difference in the name. If you go next to the slide, we can see more in details. For example, this is the high-level details. So you can see in green are the changes that we can do to our draft to make it more generic. So the root is becoming network inventory. The Kimmer rooms are now sites. We add a new object, a new class, which describes what is the type of site. And then we have the Kimmer room, which we discuss in details in this draft. The network elements works as a future. The red are different ways we can address the virtual network element, the software components list. But the key problem is that if the list of software components and other components has to be a single list, then the list has to be called component instead of hardware component, and the object class has to be an hardware. We can reuse the RFC8348 identity, otherwise we need to enhance that this data change may not be backward compatible if you want to add the software in the future. So that's why I think we need to resolve this issue now. Okay, next slide. Okay, another important design characteristic of our model in our draft is the navigation from the inventory to the topology. So we added a new module which allows to navigate, for example, between a node in the topology and a network element in the inventory, between an LTP in the topology and the port component that supports that LTP in inventory. In the future, we plan to add fiber and cables to them, we have not yet done, and then we can have a navigation between the link in the topology and the cable that supports this link. the approach that we propose is to keep and to separate the inventory from the inventory aspects from the functional aspects. So the node, the link, and the LTP provide some functions, a layer 0, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. The component is the same, and you characterize what is the functionality of the component through the topology, or in other cases, you can use also the interface model. And then you can navigate between the different views, and you can say, okay, this port component is supporting these LTPs, and the speed, for example, can be in the logical representation of the functional representation of the port. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the next steps? Okay, we think that we can update the draft as proposed now. So to make it a base model for the network inventory model. Keep the focus for our work only on the hardware inventory, but ensure that other requirements can be supported in future by backward compatible changes. And now we think whether to move this draft with these changes to the IVY working group. We are going to continue our discussion. We have weekly open meetings, which anybody can join. They are currently organized under the CCAMP WebEx on Wednesday at 4 p.m. European time. Anybody can join. We have also a GitHub. Again, moving the details of this course is administrative stuff that can be done based on what this working group decides. Okay, that's all about this draft. And then we work it out, some discussion, I don't know if it's now, if you prefer to discuss now or later, about the difference between our draft and the other draft, because we found a lot of commonalities between the two drafts. So,
probably, I mean, we have a third presentation. Probably it's better to leave it for the open discussion at the end.
Okay.
Robert, please.
So I was going to talk something about this draft. I'm going to talk about sort of process and the life cycle. So my key question to you is, you wanted to move fast with the existing draft to get use cases of that. But I think if you take the core of that out and bring it in here, that's going to naturally slow things down. I mean, ideally on our chart, I think we're saying 8 months. More realistically, it could be a year or it could be a bit longer than that. So the question is whether that's going to be too long and whether that's going to sort of force the other bit to say, well, we must have this structure because we need to move that bit quickly. And so I think my questions to you is how quickly do you need the current module to be finished? Do you need that to be published as an RFC, or is an agreement as this is the base structure sufficient? Is my second question. And the third one is another choice could be to publish the existing one in the existing namespace and maybe mark as experimental to get that out the door and done as a temporary thing. So we know it's temporary, is so you can use it, but we know this is where the future is going to be, and then sort of decouple the two so you don't have the time pressure. So any thoughts either to you, Italo, or to the chairs, CCAMP chair as well, on those ideas? Both hats.
Well, okay, that's a good question. Maybe this is a question I have to pass to the operators, but my feeling is that I would like to have a stable draft, a stable model that is future-proof, so not something like experimental that needs to be replaced in a few months. But maybe I will pass this question to the operators working on the draft. But I do expect they want something more stable, not something interim.
And the normal answer, you can have good, fast, or cheap. Choose any two. So,
well, what we tried to get here was to see if we can have a modular approach, such that we can go through the hardware solution now and add the missing pieces in a busy way later on.
The only thing, and this is up to the chairs to control this, the only thing I want to be concerned about is not having this like as a pushing force that's going to force the base model to be standardized very quickly, and then actually come back and look at the software and think, actually, I wish I'd tweak that a little bit differently or name this a bit differently. So that's my concern, and that was why I was trying to suggest maybe letting it go on an existing namespace and say you can use that. It's going to change, maybe it won't. It might just be a namespace change, might be more than that. And you can have like spend the next 4 months to decide, see if you can get some convergence and then decide. It doesn't have to be decided right now in this room, but that's the options that I see.
Okay. So, but just a comment. So the experimental track sounds interesting. The only thing is that I agree with Italo. I mean, that would be something temporary, because once we build our model, most likely the CCAM stuff will build on top of that and make the experimental obsolete, I guess. So the idea that I had in mind was to carve out from the CCAM draft whatever is good and move it to Ivy. I would, given the fact that in order to be successful we needed to be quick, I would try to avoid having technology specific parts preventing the core model to move fast. Example, if we keep all of that stuff in the core model, and that there are issues there that prevent the core model to go through, that would be a pity. So again, this is just a first reaction to your comments. That's something that it takes a little bit of more cycles to take a decision, but I think that's probably the wisest way forward. We have Joe.
Joe Clark, just some guy. I read this draft and I read the one before it, and I know it sounds like you're going to have slides comparing. There are a lot of similarities. Honestly, I like this one a lot better. It feels a lot cleaner to me. For what I feel is network or the layer 0 through 3 inventory, the hardware. I'm not saying it's done, it's complete yet, but when I look at the other one, it seemed to conflate more other use cases. There was more of an agenda of other things happening there, and it was kind of hard for me to distill the inventory bits. I saw things like management IP address and now I can't remember some, but when I looked at this one, I said, yeah, this is hardware inventory. You got some things like voltage there. You thought about references between things. I think this is a really good first step. And to me, in my head, it makes for a good basis for what inventory can be. And then you can start bringing in some of these other things where they fit, augmenting some of the more software centric elements, like you have board revision, you have like software and firmware type things in there. Again, just a guy, I think this just resonated a little bit better with me.
Thank you.
Thomas Graf. Yeah, just commenting on my previous comment on the speed. I think really we should differentiate between like an intended speed or capacity versus like the physical capacity. So I see on your draft in the introduction, your target is also capacity planning. So, and if we compare the two drafts, you have a more like an intent approach versus a more hardware approach. I would really look forward if we can combine that somewhat so that we can clearly see what's physically available, how much do we want to provision, and how that relates actually to the end-to-end VPN service, for instance. Thanks.
Benoit Claes. So I read this working group as being about the inventory, right? The hardware and the software, which scope is good already, large already. So when I start to see, I think it was Ahmed mentioning that there is inventory and there is how the things are connected, which is more topology. And maybe this is written in my head because when I start to see that people speak about termination point or link or network, I mean, yes, it's a new playground. You won't put everything in there, but maybe you want to separate like inventory and how it's connected. So maybe that part about, and you mentioned a sentence, how to get like to the termination points, how it's connected. That one to me is a little bit on the side.
Well, that is like navigation is about the fact that the same entity that you want to navigate between the topology view and the inventory view. Somehow you need to associate to have. Already you need, we discussed also in the decision map, how do you navigate? That was the question we had. We have an inventory, we have a topology, we need to navigate between the two. And we put that in a separate module because we can have use cases where people provide solid topology, use case where people provide all inventory, and use case where people provide both. And then when you have both views, it's good to be able to associate them. So it's.
And this one is exactly right. We need to do that. I'm wondering, is this part of this one or is this somewhere else? But all these questions are very important.
Yep.
But the scope could be large pretty quickly here. So you might be updating your chart every month.
I tend to agree with you, Benoit. I mean, if, as we said at the beginning, we have what we do and how it maps against what we have. Then from an admin point of view, we can decide whether it's going to be one document, two documents, etc. Again, probably focusing on something narrow could help us being faster and more effective. But I mean, this is, I mean, whether it's going to be a document or two, I don't think it would be a problem. We have Chaude. He's remote, right?
Yes, remote. Yep.
Please. If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
I think he's speaking, but it is very low. No. I was checking.
No, I think
or maybe Shadow, you can write in the chat.
Exactly. Let's do like that. In the meanwhile, we will we'll move on to the next presentation, which is Diego.
Okay, so this is about how some work that it was originated inside the OPSOC group, and now it's a little bit with 1 foot on each side in OPSOC and an Ivy. And that was somehow was I guess one of the origins of the discussions, or part of the discussions here, is about a proposal on how to model the life cycle and the management of the life cycle of what we have called assets, which is a generalization of whatever is useful for provider network service. Can you move on? I assume that most of you are familiar or have heard about what Marisol was mentioning, this DMLMO proposal that it was presented to OPSOC some time ago. And as I said, it has been part of discussions, and we have been somehow involved in talking about the ideas about inventory, etc. The DMLMO document has reached now version 10, and as part of all the discussions that we have had around internally with the rest of the OPSOC community, and with the formation of this group and preparing for this group, we had one of the things that we have decided is to restructure the whole thing. First of all, instead of talking about DMLMO, we have trying to shorten the whole idea into something that is called, is LMO proposal is about life cycle management and operations, and split it into drafts. One is on defining, which is the problem, and analyzing the details on the information model for asset management. And we are in the process of taking the other parts of the original DMLMO and building a document that will be focused exclusively on the data model. The idea is just you have here the list of the ideas behind this. One is to make a more clear identification of goals. The general concepts from the specific models, so that would facilitate the adoption of the different, first of the ideas, on the other hand, the different models as we evolve, and enable the collaboration and the alignment with initiatives as like the ones that are being presented here, work in other with a research group. Yesterday, for example, there was a side meeting to discuss how NMRG is going to evolve. To facilitate this in the future, afterwards there was another session on NMRG today. And even considering this is something that they believe is in the, well, it was listed by Daniele before, the collaboration with other groups. And that includes things like the TM Forum, 3GPP, etc. Move on. So in the latest DMLMO, in the version 10 that is right now being split into these two documents, now it's work in progress. As you have a look at it, you will see that it's in a little unstable state. If you have made the mayonnaise by hands anytime, is that there is a time in which you keep adding oil, and the whole thing seems to be going to fail, and then you keep moving, and then you've got your mayonnaise again. We're in that moment. We are, Marisol, Camilo, myself, and others are moving like crazy just to keep the mayonnaise on. But we have connected directly already with the problem statement and information modeling document that is already available. We are trying to clarify the use cases to focus very much on dynamic issues, on the life cycle management, and trying to understand, to be more clear about which are the focus that is on asset management and how this life cycle of those assets are applied. And this is the list of elements that we are we're considering right now: assets, feature, entitlements, usages, and event reports. And we will see this in the next one. Can you move? Which is about the problem statement. The problem statement tries, and this is this ALMO document that that describes the framework, describes the life cycle stages, and try to analyze which are the operations that are expected to be applied there, related with the asset selection and positioning. And when talking about assets, we're talking about virtual and physical stuff. We are talking about versioning. We're talking about software that has to be deployed. We're talking about entitlements. We try to go a little bit beyond the concept of license, etc. How these entitlements are associated with the features that are required for a particular combination of assets to provide a service, and then connect it with how the assets are being used and which are the reports about it, the experience, measurements, etc. And then how an asset can be renewed, or the commission stop, the service is stopped, and then the asset is put aside. We are very much onto precisely collecting metrics that are not metrics related to the protocol or features or whatever, but as metrics that are related precisely to the usage and how a particular asset is being used and how it has been applied for a particular service. This is the cycle that we are considering, the life cycle basically from the assets. Can you move on? And the current information model that is reflected on the data model that is right now on the DMLNO V10 and will be in the MALMO or DMALMO document soon, is basically at the center. We have the assets. Assets are associated or providing assets need entitlements to perform certain features, and those features are associated with a particular usage. There are still, we need to go a little bit in more detail, and this is a future expansion, has to about matters related like event reports or matters that are related with the customers and organizational aspects. And I think the next one is the last one, which is about how we see the connection between what we are doing in this ALMO environment and IV. First, and the most important is, in general, is avoiding the duplication of or inconsistencies. And to insist in one thing, we're talking about the inventory, what has been presented before by Bo and Italo is inventory is what you have. We believe that a life cycle has to do how you use it. Then we can discuss whether this belongs here or belongs to ops. When we're talking about how you use it is something that makes sense, taking into account the current charter could fit here. It's something that when coming to San Francisco, I was sure that it didn't. For some discussion, I'm a little bit not so sure. So I would love to hear your opinion about this. And for sure, something that is important is that wherever this lives, we need to have a common ground, especially in terminology. And this is something that has appeared once and again during the day. The idea we are interested on assets, entitlements, and we believe that assets, entitlement, and probably at least the usage report is something that we have to agree because it's something that is relevant for the whole environment. Well, looking at synergies, we plan to rely very much on what Ivy agrees in terms of the inventory, and you will see here. You will see us here around in the coming ETFs, I guess. So we will do, again, whether this ends living in Ivy or ends living in OPSOC is something that is the connection is clear, and this is something that we will be part of the usual suspects. And that's all. Thank you.
You spent months to convince me that it didn't belong here. You already changed your mind.
Exactly. That's it, because now I'm much wiser. You know. That's
Thanks.
No, seriously, Daniele, what I would like, I mean, it's something now things are not so clear to me. And I guess for Camilo and Marisol. Yeah.
It's the Mayo that is.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I've got two questions. One is in terms of like how the assets and inventory relate, whether asset is actually just this sort of hierarchical container of inventory, or whether you see that as a separate list of things that then referencing into the inventory for an asset, because I guess that's what I'm trying to correlate to. So there's that question. In terms of this work, the DLMA work or ALMO work, I spoke to, well, at least one of the authors suggesting that the document got quite long and complicated and didn't sure whether people really understood what it was. So one of my suggestions was to try and sort of split that up to, similar to how we're doing inventory, a common simpler core to explain that, and more modularity in terms of these bits extending it. And I like the idea of trying to have flexibility and like reuse inventory and these other blobs that you can reference and use, and they can act independently and be pulled together and get the greater value from doing that. So I think that'd be really useful. I also don't know exactly where this work should go. At the moment, the charge is quite clear that the focus is on getting that common inventory, and I don't want to get derailed at all. Down the line, maybe doing this sort of work here could be interesting if that's what the group thinks useful. OPSAWG is the other choice, but again, that's a tricky working group because it has a lot of different things it looks at, and sometimes you don't get the people who are really interested in that stuff, commenting, reviewing, and so it feels like it's a bit dead, even though there's at least half a dozen people regularly participating and moving that work forward. So I was surprised it wasn't adopted before, but yeah.
When it comes to the first question, and this is something that I don't know if Camilo may have another idea that taking into the advantage that he's here, or Marisol that is 10,000 kilometers away or so may have another one. But if you ask me, an asset is something I would say that in general, an asset corresponds to something that is a unit of deployment or acquisition. What's that? I mean, in these days in the good old days in which you have these boxes, when the Cisco boxes were not blue, but this has this green, exactly. Old days, that would be a box. I mean, a box of whatever. Right now it's a little bit more tricky because an asset can be a piece of software that runs on top of, that can run on different boxes. So if you have a hardware inventory, you have the different boxes, you have a software inventory. What you have, for my understanding, when you have a software inventory, you have the image, not how many of them are there. So the asset will be the combination. So it's a little bit tricky, and this is something that probably we have to refine in there. This is one thing. The other thing, we're trying to follow in what you say, trying to separate a little bit and make the whole thing not so complicated as it is right now. Yes, that's something that I hope we will succeed on this, and when we meet in Prague, everything will be much better structure and clear.
So a VNF is an asset and not inventory.
The
I get
image,
it right?
the image of a VNF is an asset, yes. The image of a VNF probably is part of the inventory.
And definitely for me, when your operators come in saying we want to solve this problem, then I think that with IETF should be listening and saying yes, we should be helping you come to a solution to this sort of thing. So I think the work is really interesting.
And finally, the reflection you made is true that OPSOC is a little bit too diverse, and this kind of matters from time to time is.
And that's on me. I'm the AD. It's my responsibility. Sorry.
No, well, no. I'm just making a statement about the fact of nature. That's.
Hello, Camilo from Entity and Author. So I just wanted to, in the practical sense, I just wanted to highlight that in YAN models, in the YAN module, the relationship with the
Not a good start. iPhone drop.
You
Latins moves too much your hands and things like that.
Yes, I'm more Italian now.
Maybe like,
it's probably so tall that I have to set up the mic. The YAN model per se, if somebody's curious, I am not an expert, but the way we solve it, so we need to deal with inventory somehow, and it has to be a general inventory. So the way I didn't do it was Jan who gave us a hand on setting up the YAN modules. It's done in a way that is flexible. So for instance, if you bring the inventory from OpenConfig, the idea is that it should fit the model. So we're not augmenting the other models. We're bringing them in a general way. So wherever we do an IB, you have, if we model hardware in a way, but then the software units in a way, the LMO should be able to refer to both of them. And so I think the solution is there, and we are able to do that now. So if you're asking how the models per se of YANC are related with the other drafts, we should be able to bring from the other drafts their concept of inventory and be able to define their entitlements, their usage and features on them. So yeah.
I know you're tempted, but don't drop it.
I'm sorry. I'm just so clumsy. Okay, somebody else will fix it.
If it works, don't touch it.
Okay.
We don't have anyone on the queue?
Yeah. No, the queue is empty. So we are ready for.
Am I dismissed?
You can go.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think next presenter is Qing, right?
Hello, everyone. My name is Qing Wu, and I think in this session, actually, we hear a lot of talk about this model design, and actually, I want to share some of my thoughts on this network inventory core model overview. And so next. So I want to break down this talk into 4 parts. So first is why IVY work, and second, what is the use case look like, and also I will share some thoughts on this design principle or guidelines to help figure out how to better model this and what is in scope, what is out, and also last I will wrap up by provide some recommendation. Next. So background and motivation, and so you know probably network observability is the big driver for network inventory. In my opinion, actually, I think today actually more application has been moved to the cloud. You see, actually, network has been spread across the multiple data center and cloud endpoint. IP address change frequently, and also workload among the nodes actually also has been moved frequently. This also cause configuration change, and in addition, actually monitoring sometimes actually has its limitation. It's hard to to identify the relationship between the data. So in some cases actually, because data built as silo. Second, data volume could be huge actually. data changes speed actually could be very fast. In many cases, you need to connect various different data format from the heterogeneous data source, and the mapping across service layer, network layer, device level actually could be the hidden, and so it's very challenging to keep track of what happened to the network at a single location at a single time point. Next. So what is network observability? I think it comprises 3 key elements actually: telemetry, data platform, action. Telemetry help you collect not just a log metric and trace data, and also you combine with data platform and action, you can really correlate the data with specific service and customers, and also you can figure out what whether the network performance can be improved and how the problem can be solved. So network observability really provide you a real-time global visibility for all performance data, metric data, trace data. Next. So we think network inventory also aim for this network observability. And actually, in the past several side meetings, we talk about this network inventory, but we have no common definition for this network inventory, and especially for some terminology we discussed in this session. Actually, we really need to reach agreement on this. And but through the side meeting discussion, actually, we actually sought out some key elements could be put into this network inventory. For example, hardware inventory data such as processor, memory, disk drive, and software inventory data such as switch, router, firmware image, as Diego mentioned, and also could be the OS and bootloader, and also the device could be the physical device and such as your network device or IoT device, especially in the campus scenario or enterprise scenario. So the network inventory data could be placed in the cloud, also can be in the on-premise, and also we can represent the physical location. Either use the site and the room racks, and also we can use geolocation to represent this physical location. And we didn't talk a lot about how to identify the network inventory in the side meeting, but usually actually you just manually register this network inventory data, or you can use some probing technology to automatically connect all of this data. Next. So there's many use cases for network inventory monitoring and management. I want to give several four use cases. The first is device component addition and changing tracking, especially in some campus or network enterprise scenario. You may need to keep track of what device really get added in the network, or you need to figure out what kind of that device type has been removed or retired from the network device. So this really help you better understanding the currently unknown the safety and also reliability blind spots. Second is the software component update. Actually, you need to monitor a set of software changes that is stored. Actually, before you store this software change, you need to figure out whether this software updated need to comply with the relevant license agreement. For example, you need to track the expiration date of license agreement. And also you need to figure out software component which is in use and which is not in use. Next. So we come to the third use case, the hardware component placement. Actually, suppose you really want to plan the physical box or physical component in some data center network or equipment room. Actually, you need to figure out the number of the hardware components can be placed in a specific rack or shelf, or you need to specify physical size for each component that meet you specific criteria. And also we can think forward, consider these energy monitoring control use cases. Actually, this may be motivated by this environmental impact, discussion. And so not only you can monitor the energy state and energy consumption for each network element, but also you can, monitor energy power state and energy consumption for each hardware component. And so really you can, calculate this kind of energy consumption in specific domain or specific location, and to generate the heat map to provide a better visibility to this kind of energy consumption. And also in some cases, hardware component to indicate some of energy control functions, so you can leverage this to provide a closed loop network management. Next. So this is a whole picture of the network inventory. You can see actually we have a network inventory, but also we have periphery or neighboring the model around this network inventory. So network inventory model actually can be placed on top of such as SDN controller, and together with like a network level model like L3 NM, L2 NM, and so all of these models can be broken down into 3 layers: service level, network level, and device level. And you can establish this correlation or model relationship using correlation method. Either you correlate it based on the mapping, or you can establish the correlation based on the augment. One typical example, correlation based on the mapping. For example, you can define separate T service mapping model or slice service mapping model to map a service model into the device model. So typical example of the correlation based on augment, you use this IETF network model as a basis. You can extend from it, support layer 3 topology, T topology, and also network inventory. And so for some cases, if you really map, service model into the device model, and sometimes these actually we make assumption, maybe leave some vendor or operator to decide how to do this kind of mapping. Next. So what's inside of network device? Actually, we can break down this network device related data into multiple layers, from service layer, protocol layer, policy layer, and network resource layer, system management layer, and a system inventory object layer. So this figure actually I capture this you can see bottom 2 layers all actually relate to network infrastructure. So this actually show the basis of network inventory. So in the right figure, actually, you can see there's some IETF worker called the network device young logical organization. This actually is a working group journal, hasn't get published, but it's set a good example how you can encapsulate conversion model at the device level. So at the encapsulation layer, you have logical network element, and this could be virtual router or virtual firewall. Next. So based on this, network device autonomy, actually you really can think, what is in the scope of IVY core model, actually, such as physical network element, but also logical network element. And for each network element, you can comprise hardware component and also system software component, not just all the software component. So based on the prefix figure, actually, we show actually, but built on top of system software, you may have some application software. We think this is not in the scope of the core model, and also files and IP address and ID, IT. This can be seen as a resource, ID is part of this, logical network inventory. Next. I think I missed one slide. No, go back. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So we really can break down network inventory into the basic network inventory and logical network inventory. So so this logical network inventory will comprise various different resource. This resource ID like IP address or VLAN ID. Actually, this can specify in various different network level model or device level model. By the way, now we don't have this logical network inventory model. Next. So I want to talk a little about correlation mapping with other model. Give several examples. For example, network topology and network device for configuration management, SAP, and attachment circuit model. Next. So we already discussed this. How to correlate with this topology. Actually, we have 2 options. Either you can extend from IETF network model and build on top of this network topology, or you can graph the network inventory to the topology model. I think there's a pro and a con for each option, but we think option 1 actually is more straightforward because this allow you more easily to map to the network topology extension. And next. So how to correlate with network device model, or whether we need to correlate with network device. So network inventory really manages physical component or hardware component. For network device model, you comprise a set of device level comparison model, and in some cases actually it doesn't need to tie them together. The reason is, for example, you have BGP interface comparison model. This doesn't need to tie to specific hardware component or software component. Second is hardware and software component change is not frequent than the converted data or ops data change. So now actually we don't have standalone logical network inventory to manage all the logical resources like ITID or VLAN ID actually. And this kind of logical resource ID actually scatter or distributed in various different device level models. Next. So the question is there any value to establish the dependency between the network inventory and network device? And we consider several the following question. What if the configuration failure caused by the no sufficient logic resource or expiration of the software license or specific feature not enabled? I think actually we have many ways actually to establish this kind of mapping. For example, we can use some other model like alarm model or incident model, maybe in the context tracing model in the network to establish physical failure, configuration failure, and hardware malfunction. Next. So how to do the correlation with the SAP? Actually, SAP. If we assume actually both network inventory and SAP can be extended from the network IETF network model, actually it will be easy to establish this kind of mapping. We can consider to have like a physical port in the network, basic network inventory, so it will be easy to establish the mapping with SAP, like parent termination point, and so this is the idea. Next. So similarly, actually for attachment circuit, really extend from SAP. Actually, if we can include like a physical connection elements, actually it will also be easy to map the basic network inventory using these physical connection elements to map to the attachment circuit or barrier in the attachment circuit Young data model. Next. So that's the end of my talk. Actually, I think Ivy should really establish common definition for the network inventory, and this includes some terminology. We should reach agreement on the same page actually. And second, actually, Ivy actually focused on network inventory monitoring at the current stage, but we also need to think forward how this network inventory can be manage it, used to manage it, not just the hardware, but also system software component. So green energy monitoring could be the use cases. And also Ivy actually, I think currently set a scope to the, core network inventory model. And we think, yeah, we need to think, how we can, establish the correlation or mapping between this network inventory core model and also logical network inventory model. Currently, we don't have such kind of model to model all the resource or capacity for each resource ID. Like for IP address pool, you may to describe how many IP address you can include in this IP address pool. So this kind of capability we should consider. And also we think if network inventory core model can consider, physical port or physical connection in the scope, that will be, better or easily to map with some other, data model. Okay, I want to end my talk.
Yeah. Thomas Graf, thanks a lot. I think this is very valuable. Could we briefly go to slide 10? So you write here that the left-hand side is in scope of IVY and the right-hand side it's not in scope of IVY, right? And if I look on the right-hand side from a network operator's perspective, I think having a clear understanding, for instance, if we take a BGP route distinguisher from which inventory these route distinguishers have been provisioned from, would be very valuable. I was reading the IVY charter. If you look at the top of the charter, I see this is actually within the scope, but as soon as I go below the charter, you're specifically defining basically what kind of inventory is in or not. So if it's not within IVY, maybe Rob, where do you think this work is belonging to? Thanks.
Sorry, Thomas, can you clarify which specific work?
Right. If we look on the slide deck on the right-hand side, this is beyond scope of IVY working group. So this is also so-called network inventory, where you track the route distinguisher, IP addresses, and prefix. So in which working group this kind of network inventory should be managed?
So I mean, I think at the moment, I can't give you an answer to where it should go. I think for the moment I can say is what's in scope for IVY at the very moment is this really focused, narrow, common bit of inventory. And then after that, the working group charter is defined to sort of cover other stuff that's related to that. I think at that stage, once the sort of core bit's done and fixed or sort of held down, put down, then we'll be able to figure out what other places we go to. So I think it's maybe just slightly early to be wondering about what else and where we go to. I think at the moment we don't want to derail that way. We want to keep focused just to what's there for now.
We are open to host Diego's work. Why not this one?
Actually, I have one response to the Thomas. Actually, in L3NM, L2NM model, we do try to specify like ID, IT, how to allocate or how to assign this kind of ID resource. But we don't have separate logical network inventory model really, to define this kind of logical resources. So this information very useful. I think I just gave some of my thought. Maybe we can based on discussion to say how to I think important to establish the mapping with this logical network resource. Yeah.
Hello, Camilo Cardona, entity. Yeah. So because it confuses me a bit. Like this is very specific slide, and since it's in part of the documents, then for like the license management, which we call entitlements, and which we are just discussing whether it's included or not. But here, I read the slide and I see it is included in the scope. So I don't know what is the official slides and what's not. Just to we are careful not to confuse all of us, because now I'm just really confused.
The only official thing so far is the charter. Okay. There is nothing else official.
Exactly. So the charter of the working group is what's written in for the charter, what's been agreed, what's approved by the ISG. That's what we're allowed to work on at the moment. The working group is allowed to recharter. I would suggest it doesn't try and recharter now. That will not help my my image in the ISG. So first session. So I think there's a lot of energy to try and fix this first problem. Let's try hard to focus it, really narrow down on that problem.
Thinking about how the discussion is going, I started to think that to some extent, I mean, probably I would agree with you that there are many things that are out of the scope of the current IVY charter, and there is one that probably would be interesting as well, because there we're talking about properties, but something that would be, I mean, I don't know if to call it a meta inventory. That is when you have a particular device, asset, whatever, is having clear which are the models that are applicable to it. So it's about having the saying, well, I have this box or I have this piece of software, and these are the models that are applicable with links, mount points, whatever. That's something that it's just for the coming 15 years, as you say in CCAM. No, but seriously, I believe it is something that is an important matter that we have to deal sooner or later, and it would help very much the normal operations and well, those of us that are in the middle of the standardization and the operations in bringing the message and telling them, well, this has changed, this has not changed, having a much clearer view of how what is applicable and when and where.
I'd originally put my hand up to actually comment on one of these slides. I think, I don't know which slide number it was, you presented like a structure of how you thought the modules could fit together. I don't know which slide you can find that. But one of the thoughts that I had is when we were doing the routing protocols in RTWG and within IETF, there's a lot of discussion of trying to get a fixed structure to fit everything in a particular place. And it's like, well, we'll put ISS under here, et cetera, et cetera. And in particular at the time, it's like, do we need to support network instances, VRFs and things? Well, obviously we do. What about devices that don't need to support that? What about devices that are very simple? What about devices that need to support virtual routers or whatever logical network functions, or the LNEs, I think they're called. So do we build a structure to have that in or not? And OpenConfig's gone the approach that they have this structure that's designed around quite a complicated network device, and you have bits that aren't enabled or not. Whereas the IETF solution was to go the other way and try and keep the modules quite rooted at the top and simple, and then to use Yang mount to sort of bring them together, sorry, schema mount, to bring them together and build more complicated hierarchies. And the bit of that I liked in terms of the IETF approach is it felt to me like it has more flexibility because you can piece the different bits together, and I think that is helpful. So in terms of what you're presenting, how things fit together, I have a slight leaning to try and not have things grouped too much and to keep them rooted in separate top-level hierarchies. Might be better. And the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of what we're presenting and that might actually apply to this work is whether you should be trying to define a grouping of inventory so it can be reused in other places. And maybe, again, I don't know if it would quite tie into what's been done on the devices, but that grouping could be reused in different places. So I was thinking maybe a grouping would be helpful and try and keep this sort of flexible and not have too much of a rigid structure. But that's just some thoughts.
Yeah, I think I did give the whole picture of network inventory, but you know, maybe just still having a you know, get the solid. Actually, I think internally, actually, we try to figure out how elements, you know, within this network inventory core model can be, you know, modeled together. Actually, one of choice actually maybe align with OpenConfig, like you know, physical component, hardware component. It really can be modeled together, you know. But to talk about how this network inventory can, you know, interact with some other model, and there's many options, you know, scale mount. Actually, there's some other, you know, mapping or augment this kind of work. And I think, yeah, really, we should, you know, allow the flexibility. And yeah, scale mount is one option. I think there's some other option could be reused. And yeah.
Sorry, Ahmed, before you you make your question, you make your comment. One thing that I mean, it's worth clarifying. In the first document that we will produce, the one with the core inventory model, it would be great to add a section saying what's in it and what is not what is in Ivy scope and what is not in Ivy scope. So let's try to scope the first basic model that we will produce, because as of now, saying what's as Rob said, we can say what's in Ivy scope today and what is not today, but maybe in 1 month we realize that we made a mistake in the charter and it's worth adding something. So please, since we don't have an official slide that says what's in scope and what is not, the official things that we have are the drafts. So in the draft, I don't know who will be the authors who will be working on that. please clarify what's in the scope of the model, at least the first one, the basic one. Sorry, please go ahead.
No worries. Ahmed Al-Hassani from Swisscom. So I'm not sure if I agree everything here on what's on scope and out scope. I would leave that to the charter and let's not change it in the next 2 weeks. Let's give it for at least till next IETF. But I do strongly agree with you on the sense that probably we should start prioritizing first the physical things because I hope these are the easiest one to do. For me, the physical things are the things that I can have plugged in my network or often in a warehouse waiting to be plugged in. And later we can build on that. The second note would be these things should be easy to augment later. So if we have a topology or a digital map that will need to refer to the inventory, then it's easy to add to it. I would avoid, personally speaking here, is the inventory augmenting something that's higher, like a topology or a digital map or something like that. Just a couple notes there.
I just wanted to make you one question, Chin, to see you put there as the basic functions, you put a lot of management in all of the things. If we can go to slide 10, 1 second.
Which one? Sorry.
10. I think it's 10, slide 10 that you have here is, for example, network element management, license management, etc., etc. So if you can try to say which are the functions included in management, okay? So we are all in the same page. Because also just as an example, when we created the first time the hardware inventory for my operations, so some of them had the expectation that, okay, so with this, can I also do I also have the possibility to activate the cards, or do I still need to go to the element and do the activation? Because it seems some vendors you need to go and you need to start activating cards in order to them to appear later in the inventory. So I said, well, no. I mean, you do that by yourself, and then I will collect everything that is there. But we had different expectations. So here, maybe you put management. Maybe the expectation is yes, of course. I mean, of course, you are gonna activate also the hardware, and you are gonna activate also the licenses that are there in the device, not just seeing what is there or what is supposed to be there. So I wanted to. What is your view on, or what is your expectation in terms of management for what relates to inventory here?
Yeah, I think I provide several use cases, actually, not just monitoring, but also try to you can leverage this kind of network innovation inventory data actually to such as energy monitoring and control. Actually, you really can help to optimize the energy consumption actually, and also some other cases like a physical component placement. Actually, we actually did cover how to manage this kind of information, but this could be described, but yeah, how to use is not in the scope of IV actually, but useful to to understand these use cases to say how to manage this kind of different network inventory data. Yeah. So in addition, actually, I might respond to Ahmed actually about in the previous slide I gave the overview actually the system software and also system inventory is part of network infrastructure. So I think limited to the hardware, maybe yeah, this is a good starting point, but based on the IV, the scope, I think both software and hardware need to be modeled. But this software, I think it should be the system software, just like you buy some router or switch, and also you not expect this bare metal. Actually, they will already have this kind of image, right? Router switch image. So this should be part of this modeling, and also try to align with what OpenConfig is doing. They model the physical component and software component together, and that's really help you provide the consistent representation. Yeah, just answer this.
Okay. Done. The next.
Dan Voyibel, Canada. Well, the question for chairs and presenters, I'm new to this world. And I noticed in the charter there is something about TM Forum. Will there be any mapping between what we're doing here and the TM Forum? I'm getting some questions from my IT guys as I'm exposing this to them, and I'm just curious to see how far are we going, especially that chart is very good because it's a good summary. You could see almost like the stuff that is in scope seems to be TM Forum land from what I understand. And the stuff that is outside of scope seems to be IETF land from what
It's
I'm...
good that the IETF stuff is outside our scope. We are in IETF. Probably there's something wrong.
Yes.
No,
so will there be any work to provide some kind of mapping and direction?
At least from a terminology point of view, yes. You've seen it's the first bullet that we have in the charter. So that is already a mapping. Then more than that is not anything that we can promise. If a terminology alignment is, I believe, is a good starting point. Let's see where this brings. Adrian.
Hi, Adrian Farrell. I'm trying to decide whether I'm getting worried or not. I completely sympathize with the desire to have an inventory of what's in the warehouse, or maybe in the van on the way to the data hut, or sitting in the cupboard somewhere. But I keep running into the word network, as in the top of this slide, network inventory function. And I think we need to be clear on our scope, whether we're doing an inventory of what is actually deployed, not necessarily switched on, but deployed in the network and able to be switched on, compared to what is on its way to being deployed. I'm not saying that the warehousing stuff is out of scope. I just need us to be clear as to whether it is in scope.
That's probably enough to add yet another status. So we have the operational status, admin status, and probably a deployment status to distinguish what's in the van and what's inside the site, inside the room, inside the rack, right? Please.
Is that in charter or not? I sort of think hopefully it may not match in terms of the Yang model that gets produced. That's what I'm thinking, that actually the Yang model is going to be, it's just defining inventory, and hopefully it's not tied to a network, and hence you could potentially, somebody could come along and use it for these other use cases and we wouldn't know, we wouldn't care. In terms of the sort of documentation that goes around the model that's describing how it's used, I think that should definitely be focused on the network use case. And I can't remember in the charter whether we are clear about whether the network inventories is just the stuff that's coming off, what's actually deployed and running, as in you go and query it from the devices, they give you what their inventory is, you're aggregating that up together into a higher level model at the network layer. That's what I had in my head. But there's also the valid use case of saying, well, actually, I want to configure that network inventory up front because I know what's going to come along, what's going to be there. I can put stuff in there that's not yet provisioned. That seems reasonable to me. So I can see it can have those two sides. So I think I've hopefully completely avoided answering your question.
Nacho from Telefonica. I wanted to propose, before start working on this Yang core module for the inventory, perhaps to start working on a glossary, so we avoid these terminology clashes. Because, for example, I see that when we talk about when we refer to a network element, sometimes we also use device, platform, node. So we are using different terms to refer to the same concepts. So yeah, I wanted to propose to perhaps a glossary or taxonomy to clarify all. all these issues. No, it will be helpful for defining the core module.
So, can I just respond to that? Because again, I think it's like a child's question. So definitely, I think that's great. What I don't do is to spend our time initially trying to do that first, because otherwise we're going to spend a year doing terminology and glossary and all stuff. It's like, and just slow the thing down. So I definitely think the working group, and actually maybe the chairs will speak to how we might do next steps and progress from here. But like a GitHub repository, gathering issues, maybe some sort of beginning draft. I'm not sure they're adopted drafts, but drafts that are covering some of this terminology and stuff at the same time, because there's no reason why the working group can't be also doing the core inventory model and also these other bits. And I think in terms of how the charter was written, it was saying you might want to have some of these temporary documents holding these things. We may never publish those. It's just to get everyone on this common standing. So that's how I was hoping would happen, is we would get together, we would work on these different documents, covering these, but doing it in parallel rather than one after the other.
Yeah, so after Italo, it would be great to close the queue, because we have 5 minutes left, and it would be great to have a couple of them to wrap up.
Yep. So Alex, Clem Futureway, regarding this question, I think one thing that will be good to clarify is where we expect these models to live. I think this is key to the whole question, basically, what is in scope, out of scope, what is the TM forum, and so forth. My personal view would be the inventory should pertain to what's in the network. So basically, the network devices up to the level of the controller. But anything that would be at the level of the OSS, I think that there we're getting really into TM forum, etc. land, and I would rather actually avoid that. And then we would get actually into a lot more additional functions. But I think it will be important to clarify this also with the use case that were shown earlier. Make it clear who the actors are, and basically so that we know where we expect these Yang models to be implemented and live.
Yeah, good suggestion. Good comment.
Nils Warnke, Deutsche Telekom. Actually, to Alex and Adrian, I quite have the opposite opinion. We need to have a status somewhere mentioned in the models, because coming from our experience with the automation, there is something like plan status for hardware. And you need to be able, for planning purposes, to model that already early in the orchestration engines and into the network inventory. Hence, I do propose to keep these at least as optional fields in the model, because they are really, really useful. Sorry, it's not necessarily geolocation, but that I can insert an element into the network inventory, even though it has the operational status of planned and not active or whatever.
Italo Busi, 2 comments on this discussion. On this discussion on the planned versus deployed, we have an open issue in the CCamp GitHub. May not be as trivial as appears at the beginning, because we have different type of mismatches. You can have an empty slot where you plan to add a new board, or you can have a board deployed in a slot that is thought to be empty. But the most complex is when you plan to have a board X and you actually have deployed a board Y. And my comment on the GitHub was maybe we need to have two separate lists. I remember Nigel commented on it. I don't remember his comment. So it's an issue we are discussing. So we can, people is welcome to join on the Thursday call. We are discussing this idea, whether it's solely deployed, and it's good to get the feedback, and maybe we need to talk about also what is planned, and then we need to figure out the problem of the mismatches. But the mismatch can happen everywhere in the hierarchy. If I have a board with 2 daughter boards, and I have actually inserted a board, expecting that I have 1 board with 2 daughter boards exposed. If I have deployed this board without the board and maybe 4 direct ports, then the tree is clearly different. So it's not that trivial as it appears. So we need to work out the solution. If there is a real requirement, we are welcome to do that. The second issue, we have to be careful when we talk about inventory. There is a lot of data which is not exposed on the interface, but is written manually in the database. And also that we discussed a lot, and we think is out of scope, standardizing the internal database of the OSS, of the inventory database in the OSS. What we need to standardize is the YAM model where we provide the information, we feed the information from the controller to the OSS, not what is inside the OSS database. And also this is a boundary that we need to clarify. Thank you.
So now the most difficult part, wrapping up. Thanks, Chin. How do we proceed? Having a different everyone submitting his or her contribution would be a nightmare, because in the end we would need to merge drafts. So probably starting from a single document where everyone can contribute from day zero would be the best option. L3NM have been so successful with the operators driving the work. If we managed to find the same arrangement, that would be great. This doesn't preclude the vendors to contribute and being listed out as authors, etc. But having operators in the driving seat probably would make the work more successful. So, I mean, I'm not saying you and you will be the drivers of the work, etc. This is something that will be decided by the different participants in the working group. So that's no one will force anyone. From an operational point of view, as Rob suggested, we will arrange interim meetings to speed things up between now and I anticipated what you were saying. We will try to have at least a couple of interim meetings in between. Any thought you would like to share? I speak too much.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of good discussion today. Just hope anyone can continue your discussion on the mailing list, and we will finally reach consensus on the mailing list.
So the only question I had in terms of process was whether you want to do 1 or 2 interims, or you want to just sort of set up like weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings or something like that. I'll leave that up to you to figure out what the best thing is. But I think there's energy here to get going. I think there's energy here to sort of try and get the core bit done quickly. That is also in our milestones and things. So I just don't want us to sort of get slow and go into like the 4-month cycle stuff, because I've got other drafts like that and it's not fun.
Okay. So for the first time, it was pretty successful, I would say. Thanks a lot, everyone, for participating, for giving your contributions and sharing ideas. And let's see you in Prague.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you. So you have almost covered the whole thing.
You will see that next time you will be more familiar, more comfortable. It will be easier.
Yes, I feel so.
The first.
So I'm going to check the phone now just to see how things are going. Check. I did put something eventually. It's up to you. I can just check. The three of us, if you're through now. So if we go there is a